live stream.
Yep. Okay, here we go. It looks like we are live, but I'm double checking that because you never know with technology. And we are good to go. Okay. Close that off my phone so that I don't. Okay, welcome to the Beyond the Comfort Zone live, everyone. It is a show that helps you step out of your comfort zone into a place of growth and learning. For those of you joining us for the first time, I'm Aviva Wilmer, and I'm a Vistage Chair here in Atlanta, Georgia. I lead two groups of incredibly driven and ambitious CEOs who want to accelerate towards their goals faster. Our peer groups are a mastermind of CEOs who come together regularly to share ideas and experiences and support one another, knowing that together they're going to achieve more than they would on their own. No matter how many years of experience a leader has, their reality is their knowledge and their experiences are limited to that of their own, and because they haven't been exposed to it yet. A peer environment creates opportunities to see the unknown, be more proactive, and make better decisions for your business. Today, I am honored to have Kaleem Clarkson, the COO of Blend Me, as my guest. Kaleem is a remote work advocate. He's a people operations professional, highly sought after speaker. Blend Me, his company, is a remote employee experience consultancy that helps startups and small businesses onboard, engage, and retain the remote teams. He's been doing this prior to the pandemic, prior to remote being the topic of conversation. He's really passionate about his work and work-life integration and maximizing the remote employee experience. Kaleem's been featured in Harvard Business Review. He was one of 2022 LinkedIn's top voices for remote work and one of the top 15 remote work advocates and leaders by the All-American Speakers Bureau. So we are very lucky to have Kaleem with us today to talk about remote workplace and hybrid workplace and how do we do this the right way, the effective way for our businesses and our teams. For those joining us live, please put your questions and your feedback in the comments. I will be paying attention to those throughout the show. I'll monitor them. And before we start, I do want to kind of get a feel for who's here today. Can you put in the comments if your workplace is fully remote, hybrid, or fully in person as of today? That will give us kind of a feel of who's here in the spectrum of the remote workforce conversation. Awesome. Well, welcome, Kaleem. I'm really excited to have you with us.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm kind of blushing a little bit on that intro. Jeez.
I got to talk you up, but that means you got to perform.
Gosh. Oh, no, the pressure's on, right? The pressure's on.
Okay, I've started to see some of the answers come in, which is good. Mixture of workplace. So Kaleem, before we get into all the dynamics of how our work is today, where we want to go, what is the biggest misnomer about remote work?
Ooh, that's a good question. That's a really good question. There's so many, but I'll pick one, and it's close to my heart. I think you can't build connections with people working remotely. I feel like that's the biggest misnomer. Everybody right now, we've been working remotely for, 2.5 years now. But a lot of us experts or advocates, whatever you want to call us, we will tell you that pandemic remote is not normal remote work, right? Because you can't get together to build those connections. But, if this past May I had an opportunity to attend Running Remote, which is the world's largest remote work conference, and a company called Doist won the Culture Award, and they're fully remote. So that's just evidence that you can build connections while working remotely. And actually, that's how I met you, right?
That is very true. We met online.
Absolutely.
So let's speak a little bit and dig in further to this pandemic remote environment versus the environment that existed before, and maybe even the remote environment that we think might exist after. Can you help talk us through those differences?
Yeah, I would say, pandemic remote is pretty much organizations that just were not prepared, that were just forced into remote work. And I would say that that's most likely the majority of organizations. I think I saw a stat somewhere at some point globally. I think it was something like 60 or 70% of all employees were working remotely at some point due to the pandemic. So that's a lot of rushing to doing something that you're not prepared for. And we all know what preparation does, right? It makes you perfect, right? Well, not perfect. No one can be perfect, but I think most of the struggles that organizations had during that transition was because they did not have those things set up properly. The organizations that were remote prior to the pandemic, nothing different. Um, Let me say, nothing operationally was different, but they couldn't do their retreat as normally as they would do. The company I mentioned, Duos, they're actually in Austria right now hosting their retreat. So the first retreat they've hosted in 3 years. So again, a fully remote company, they weren't able to have their annual retreat. So I just think that the biggest difference is preparedness, and a lot of organizations are feeling the pains right now, making that transition. And the other thing I think that happened in that context is that, and I'm sure people have heard this before, it feels like remote work kind of exposes the cracks in the organization's operations, culture. It really exposes it, because now you're really relying on measurable objectives and measurable accomplishments versus maybe just seeing somebody in the office every day. So I think the big difference between remote work and pandemic remote work is preparation.
For those companies who, have been either remote or hybrid throughout the pandemic, I mean, we're now looking a couple years into this.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think is the biggest difference between the ones who are doing it really well and those who are can't wait to get back to the office because they're still struggling?
Yeah, another great question. Everyone, listen, if you want hard questions, you reach out to Viva, because she will give you those hard questions. She started off real hard right off the beginning. Right off the beginning. Intentionality. Again, I know we talked about preparation, but intentionality. Organizations who are very, very intentional in every aspect. So we talked about building connections. One of the things that we've talked about, I talked to your group about, was building a social connection strategy. You actually have to plan that stuff, right? So the organizations that are very intentional about everything, so documenting all of your policies and procedures, being intentional about your internal communication strategy, right? Like, how are you going to communicate? Are you going to use email? Are you going to use Teams? Intentional about transparency. I think transparency is huge when you talk about building trust, like, because you can't see people when you're working remotely. So how can you build that trust? Well, the more transparent you are about your operations, about your conversations, that's why we fully support and encourage our clients to use an internal communication tool like Teams or like Slack, where you can have public conversations versus email where they're siloed. So I would say intentionality absolutely is the main difference.
Okay, so intentionality. Let's break this down because there's a lot of areas when you talk about remote work, right?
Yeah,
There's
yeah,
this intentionality around your culture, around making sure people are connecting. There's intentionality around the tools and the processes. So let's kind of dive into each a little bit separately. Starting with social connection, what would you say? How do you create a good social connection strategy, like you mentioned before, in a remote environment?
yeah. I think the first thing so we're a huge we really believe in surveys and polling and interviews and hearing from the employees, because we feel like the employees kind of drive what you want to say culture. I try not to use that word as I try to use that word as least as possible. But so we firmly believe before you can start implementing any type of social connection strategy or social connection plan, You need to kind of assess what connections your employees are missing. And we kind of break down our connections into three different categories. So we have, let's see here, we have personal. I'm sorry, we have professional. So your professional connections would be like your associations, your mentors, things like that. Then we have lifestyle connections. And again, this is what we've blend. This is how we've broken down the different types of connections. So I'm sure there's all sorts of definitions on connections, but this is how we do it. So that first one, again, was about professional connections. So again, mentors, peer-to-peers, advisors, associations, cohorts, and then lifestyle connections, right? So you have your friendships, you have hobbies, you have well-being, things that you like to do, book reading, so like your lifestyle connections. And then you have intimate. Yes, intimate. I'm talking about, yes, the organization should consider whether people need intimate connections. So when we talk about intimate connections, we're talking about families. So like, maybe you have you live with a lot of your family members, or maybe you're taking care of elderly parents or something like that. Then you have spiritual connections. You have different religions, especially if you're talking about a global company, or people located in a lot of different places. Maybe you want to ensure that there is a safe spot for different types of religions to come together and talk about their community. Then you have partner relationships, LGBTQ, and hetero relationships. So there are things that people desire when it comes to connections. So the first thing you do is you do some sort of assessment to identify what connections that people feel like that they're missing. And then once you do that, right, once you have that information, you can start building your social connection strategy. And what we kind of define our social connection strategy as, it's a plan of action, right? It's a plan of action that's designed to reduce loneliness, and really kind of improve collaboration. So, and you do that by providing these intentional like opportunities for your employees to build on all of those different connections that we talked about. So, what we suggest is you start off 2 years out, because it's sometimes in higher ed, they call it sometimes backwards design, kind of start from where you were before and work backwards. So we suggest starting 2 years out and just kind of start planning what those look like, and looking at like what resources do you have, looking at the types of events, the type of things that you can do. And then once you get all of these ideas down, like the types of events, so for example, your annual retreat, maybe that's at the end of the year. And then, maybe you have some virtual events, then maybe you have some team events. So first you have to do that assessment, then you start planning what those events are. And then that's kind of your strategy, because you probably can't do all of them. So, you kind of have to come up with some concepts, what they cost, how many resources it would take to actually successfully implement that type of event, and then kind of pick and choose and build kind of a schedule so that everyone can plan for it. Again, it's intentional, right? So that's what social connection strategy is.
So you're talking events, and you're talking a lot of different things that we're trying to cater towards from everything that you described before. Can you give some examples outside of an annual retreat, although maybe even a little bit more about an annual retreat, of some of the types of events you've seen companies do that have addressed some of those different social needs?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I love this example. HubSpot has done this. They created a moth series, which I think is really cool. And this is actually old. I think they did this way before the pandemic. They created this moth series where people get up and just tell their stories. I actually attended my first moth. If you've never been to one, they're amazing. People just get up there and just tell a story. And I think I went to a moth where the topic was birthdays. And everyone got up and told a random story that involved a birthday. So the moth series, what HubSpot did is they took that concept and they brought it internally. They even rented out a theater, and people got up there and told their stories, and people were crying, I guess, and laughing, because you really don't know somebody's story. You know what I mean? Like I've met you a bunch of times, but I don't know your story. Like I'd love to hear your story. I'm sure it's interesting, and that basically builds connections. So a moth series. Thank you, HubSpot. I think that's a great one. I think that's outside the box. It's interesting. You get to really know the person, so that's pretty cool. What else could you do to build connections? Oh, team travel grants. So we talked about the annual retreat. You're bringing the whole company together. Hopefully, it's offsite. But team travel grants, seen that work very well, where you give each team kind of a budget and they decide where they want to go. I believe this was taken from Automatic, which is the founder of WordPress's company, Matt Mullenweg. So Automatic is, Matt Mullenweg's company. So they provided team travel grants where they give a certain budget to the team, and the team kind of decides where they want to go. Let's see. What are some other?
Fun.
I got a couple more. Let's see. I like this one. So providing resources for networking opportunities. I think that's a really cool one, because a lot of times you're thinking, well, how do I get the employees together? But like, you don't necessarily need to always build connections just with your employees. Like we talked about professional connections. Those are connections with people in the industry, right? So what's really helpful is like putting some resources together, like a list of conferences. Let's just use developer conferences, for example, because I'm a former developer. So like, developers are feeling, you're a remote company, some of your people are feeling a little distant, a little isolated. Provide some resources for them to identify some meetups maybe in the area that are around like a language, even like your marketing professionals, and then invite some non-developers to go to that conference to like just be there and be around their colleagues and learn about what they're learning about. Like as a marketing person, you may not need to know what PHP is or what what code is or JavaScript. But even if you're sitting in those sessions with your colleague who's a developer and you're sitting there like, I have no idea what people are talking about, you're experiencing something professional together, and you'll build a network. So I really like that idea of having a page of resources where people can actually go and build these connections. And they don't necessarily always have to be in person. So that's the other thing. Like, of course, in-person connections, that's what we're talking about right now, because there's a lot of loneliness and isolation with remote work. But you can also put in some virtual opportunities as well.
So give us an example of a virtual opportunity that you've seen done really, really well.
All right, let's. He's gonna kill me because I can't remember. I'm drawing a blank on his company. I've seen improv done very well virtually. Super fun. Super fun. David Klasko is his name. Check him out. Google David Klasko. He has. There we go. It came to me. I knew if I kept talking, it would come back to me. Artly Working. So check out Artly Working. He's an actor. And what he decided during the time, the pandemic, everyone's pivoting. That's why I just love some of the great innovations that have come out during, these very difficult years, is he's an actor. And he ended up saying, let me get some of my actor friends and we'll do improv for organizations. And it's absolutely hysterical. I was a part of one of them, and it's so fun. It breaks down the barriers. You're all on Zoom. You're all doing like funny faces. I just felt like it was really, really engaging because, sometimes when you do these virtual events, like happy hours or the happy hour thing got old real quick because there's just really no topic or purpose. With this, everyone's kind of participating in, the funny faces and the joy that people have doing improv. It was super cool. So I check out Artly Working and David Klasko. Shout out.
So if you're doing virtual events, then I'm guessing your suggestion is make sure that there's actually something at the events around, not just hanging out and saying hi.
Yeah. It's I was talking to I'm going to start all sorts of people here. Garrett Rokish, who runs a company called Social Architect, and the idea is like building real connections and sometimes and we kind of kicked this off in our event that we had together, is those transactional conversations of like how where you work, what's your title, what you do, there's really not, you don't really build any real connection there. And he uses these different games to build true connections, and the idea of play. And the whole reason why that people end up building connections over play is that there's a purpose. There's rules around the engagement. It's really interesting when you think about it, because like board games, like think about board games and every like game night, super fun, because there's like a structure on the conversation and no one's kind of dominating the conversation, because there's rules and it passes it on to the next person. So you're absolutely correct. If you're going to do some sort of online event, you have to just ensure that there's rules and there's structure around what it is that you're doing.
That's interesting. I never thought about that with a game night before, but it makes perfect sense.
Yeah, you have an introvert like
talk about it all night long.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, y'all can tell I'll talk about anything, and I'm just boom. But you need a reason to quiet me up, right? Like, be quiet, Kaleem. Let someone else talk. So introverts, having games and having rules allows everyone really to participate.
So let's separate from the social connection. I think that's really important, but I want to make sure we get to some of the other critical things.
Okay.
One of the things, and please, people, if you have questions too, put them on in here. I would love to make sure we're addressing your specific questions as well. But that I hear a lot is it is really difficult to onboard, train, mentor people in a remote environment. What are your tips, advice do you have around that?
So on that statement, of course, I'm jaded a little bit, right? But I just 100% disagree. I disagree that it's hard. Is it, again, a lot of work? Yes. Does it take a lot of intentionality? Absolutely. But the key thing for onboarding, especially in a remote work setting, is you have to use some sort of framework or system that's going to ensure that your employees can complete this asynchronously. Okay. They can complete this onboarding on their own time, because you are going to have different time zones for a lot of people. You are going to have some people that just want to get up and crush their work and then maybe do some onboarding later on. So we find that it's very, very important to design your onboarding framework or application to be asynchronous. And what that means is when the employee feels like is the right time. Now, do they need to have a deadline to complete certain modules? Yeah, give them a deadline, but ensure that the product is asynchronous. The other thing is keep things short. Break your onboarding up into different modules, just like an online class. See, that's the challenge that I have with this whole return to office and remote work can't work. Like, our higher ed institutions who are training us all, every single one of them have online classes. So it's like you're learning, from Yale and Harvard about how to run a business in an online class. So, I mean, it's just, it just drives me crazy. Like, come on. Like, anyway. So, with online classes, you have a syllabus, right? It breaks down what it is that you're going to learn, what part's going to happen. So you want to have an outline, a quote unquote syllabus, a plan, so that a person knows the things that they're going to have to do. And you're also going to want to break down those modules into short pieces. You don't want to have someone watching a 30-minute intro video about your product. Personally, what we suggest to clients is like you need a very personable video from the CEO, from the founder, talking about like what was the spark? Why did the country start? I mean, why did the company start? Right? Like we want to hear about the Bezos in the garage story. Like that is what people think about, because they're trying to affirm whether they made the right decision working for your company. I think there's another stat out there that says most people know whether they're going to quit or look for another job within the first 45 days of being employed.
Which is so short.
Which is super short. So you need to make sure that they understand like the true heart of why the company was started. So short modules, definitely get a video from the CEO, short, 3 to 5 minutes, no longer than that. We always we always suggest, find a system. We use Trainual. Shout out Trainual. We really like it because you can actually build different modules and then test people after. Like, why was the company started? Did the CEO start the company in the garage? Then the other thing is once you have that application kind of built for onboarding, we also suggest build your onboarding out for 1 year, not 30 days. Most people look at onboarding as like a month. It takes so much longer for you to understand kind of like the nuances in the company. I mean, just think about it. Like, who do I reach out? Who do I reach out to for this thing? Who do I need to talk to kind of hear about like, how the marketing meeting went? It takes some time. So spread it out over a year. Like, spread it out over a longer period of time. There's some good amount of research out there that like some of the best onboarding programs are 18 months. And a lot of times those were in banking because, I mean, there's a lot of tough things to learn in banking. So they kind of spread it out that long. So spread out your onboarding. So modules, use a system, short pieces, spread it out over a longer period of time. And then the third thing that I would suggest is definitely create onboarding cohorts, new employee cohorts. Those are wonderful because what happens is they build their own little community. You have somebody that was hired newly with you that you can reach out to, because when you have a question, it's sometimes a challenge to ask a question because you feel like you don't want people to think that you don't know anything or like that. So it's easier sometimes to ask a question with a colleague that's going through something similar to you. So we really have seen new employee cohorts work wonders, and they actually some people have built Teams channels or Slack channels for like the year and the quarter of when you were hired or the year that you were hired, and they end up building lasting relationships, and it's cross departmental. That's a big piece.
It's very interesting. I didn't really think of it before, but technically, so when I became a chair, all our training was virtual because that's middle pandemic. And one of the things that they recommended was finding an accountability partner or two. So a couple of us formed our own cohort and we met every week just to touch base. What struggles are you having? Where do you go to find X? And really bonded. And we were, all over the country. We weren't in, the same place or anything. We just met virtually once a week. So I can absolutely speak to the power of that. We kind of did it ourselves.
Oh, right. The power of groups, hence Vistage. So join Vistage. If you're a CEO, join Vistage. There it is.
But, well, that was just chairs. I mean, we were all in training to do what we're doing now. So it's interesting when you think about it. I think that's useful on many levels.
Yeah. The accountability partner thing. You talk to anyone who's received a PhD. My sister just recently got her PhD. Most PhDs, because your dissertation takes a year or 2 years to write, most PhDs end up building an accountability group because it's such a long task. It's so easy to procrastinate, and that's one thing that there's no way to cram your dissertation. Nobody is ever successful at doing that. That's why there's so many people that do all the coursework. And it's a term in higher ed what they call ABD. They do all the coursework, but they never finish their dissertation. So all but dissertation. So yes, the whole idea of accountability groups and accountability has been used for a long time. So I would definitely suggest, hey, find your group.
A lot of good ideas there. I know that's an area I have heard many people, business leaders, talk about struggling is how to do that training, and some, excuse me, great ideas. The next piece you mentioned in there actually a tool. I'm curious because you're familiar with a lot of different tools out there in systems, but what would be, a couple of tools that you have seen help companies be more intentional about communication, training, So not necessarily the culture and social piece, but just to make sure
Mm,
that they're communicating effectively and managing effectively in this environment.
mm, mm. So like if you're talking about goal setting and achieving those goals in different areas, obviously EOS, the Entrepreneur Operating System, a ton of people use that. Um, they love to use rocks. I like their terminology. But there are a lot of different kind of like goal setting things. We like GTM Hub, that uses OKRs, so you can kind of set up your goals and your team members kind of can see how many goals that you've achieved. I think that's really important for remote work as well, because it's a way for managers to see the progress of someone without checking in on them. That tap on the shoulder management style. We can't do that remotely. And honestly, it never was very, very good. So I would suggest looking at those two things just for general, like, are we meeting our goals? We said we were going to do this. Are your employees reaching their potential? I would look at some of those two systems. As far as like internal communication and training people, I would just look at any type of tool where you can build courses and then that it allows you to embed different media. So again, I mentioned Trainual, WalkMe, any type of Lessonly, I believe is another one. Any type of course service that you could use that could do something like that. Build the training materials out, and then of course after that, you have to have an intranet where you're actually going to kind of post like the standard operating procedures or something like that. Like using Notion. We advise people to use Notion to build your intranet where you put your policies, where you put your standard operating procedures. You could also use something like Almanac, which is very simple, similar. So
And you work with companies and advise companies from small to very large. Some of these things to me, as I hear them and digest them, sound like, oh, if I'm a large company, I can pay for all these things. I can have people who develop all these training programs to do this really, really well. What do you advise for the smaller business who really does want to create that right remote work environment, but may not have access to all the tools and resources or have a full-time learning development person on staff?
yeah, I mean, there's a ton of resources out there, and just to kind of clarify, we will only work with startups and small businesses, and we use the SBA definition of 1,000 employees or less, which I believe is huge. I think 1,000 person company is pretty big. So yeah, we only work with small businesses, startups, and small businesses. And generally speaking, like those tools like Trainable and stuff like that, those tools are built for growth. So if you only have a few employees, you're only paying per user, so they're somewhat affordable. But I mean, obviously, the answer, and I'm again a little biased, is hire somebody part time. Use fractional people operations. Um, I honestly believe, chief people officer or fractional people officer should be, like your fifth or sixth hire. Like it's important to get these people in place early. Um, I think chief learning officer, you're right. I feel like that's some big time stuff. But what are managers doing? Like to me, I also feel like managers, they're there to kind of help their employees maximize their potential, right? Help to guide them. I feel like the manager's role is shifting a little bit, and it's shifting a little bit towards being kind of like a counselor, a counseling culture in a way. Like, do you have challenges? How can I help you? You know, overcome those challenges. Well, I feel like some of the responsibility of training their team does lay on the manager. Like you have to figure out a way to start building things that are scalable. So to me, I feel like managers have a lot of power and a lot of impact on the teams. And if the manager is focused on learning and developing, then the rest of the team would be. So I would suggest small businesses. Number one, you have to appoint somebody that's going to be in charge of people. You know, you always have, generally speaking, startups will hire, their first hire will probably be a CTO, which is probably the co-founder. Then the second hire is probably a salesperson. And then they hire a bunch of developers. They probably have a fractional CFO. So at the same time, hire a fractional people person if you can't hire someone full time.
So it's one of the things I'm hearing outside of obviously a people, a chief people officer is critical, but is that the managers, these tools are easy enough to use that the managers can develop the trainings. It's not like you have to have somebody developing the trainings for you.
Absolutely. And also involve the staff. So we're working with a client right now where they're a $50 million sock manufacturer, right? And they've been successful for multiple generations. They're a third generation company in Manhattan. So they've been successful, but they didn't have any standard operating procedures written down. Everybody kind of sat next to a person and learned the job sitting next to someone that knows it, took that, went back to their desk, went through those things. When they had the question, they'd go run back to the person, hey, but then come to find out everyone during our assessment, everyone was doing it slightly different. Well, that's not efficient. So what we did is we had them write a standard operating procedure. All the employees contributed. Like, hey, I do steps 1 through 5 like this. This person says I do it 1 through 5 like this. Well, can we merge these two? Which one's more efficient? So you can also include your team members. So, it's just a shift. It's just a shift in thought. It's a shift of getting everything out of your head and into process. So if the CEO and leadership is like, has to happen, this is top priority, because if we have to scale, we get a Series A, Series B, we get, $20 million, we got to hire 50 people tomorrow. How are you going to scale? How are you going to onboard them asynchronously? How are you going to, how are they going to learn the job, how are they going to learn the task that it takes to get the job done? So it's just a shift in priorities.
It's a shift in the way people work, right? Versus going to people's desks. They're doing it at home on their own time, and a lot of times less meetings. You said something when we were talking, you were in our meeting, that really struck me. And I would love to hit on it here a little bit. And that's being, and now I'm the one forgetting the exact words, but basically thinking about remote from a proactive standpoint versus a very reactive standpoint, and integrating remote just into who you are, whether or not you're remote or not, but being a remote ready workforce. And you have a much better phrase for it that's blanking on me right now.
I get you. I remember. Okay, so it was the difference between remote friendly versus a remote first.
Thank you.
That was the difference, right? Like,
okay.
Yeah.
Now that I've described it in a very weird way, can you please explain the difference and talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. So these are two different operational models. So remote friendly versus remote first. And again, shout out to Todoist. I mean, I get most of my stuff. I mean, there's so many companies that I just adore because they do such a great job of sharing their stuff. GitLab's another one, Zapier. Don't take it from me. Go look at what they're doing. So remote first is an operational framework where all the processes and policies are built with the assumption that not everyone is face to face. Okay, so in theory, you could have people in the office 5 days a week, I guess, in theory, and still be kind of a remote first company. What that means is so we're going to kind of go through the difference between the two. Like in a remote friendly company, you're allowed to work remotely, where in a remote first company, it's like you're empowered. Like you can do that. Like we want you to do it. But I would say like one of the biggest differences is that like in a remote friendly company, or brick and mortar, whatever you want to say, synchronous communication is the most used. It's prioritized. So what does that mean? Meeting after meeting. You got to go to another meeting. You walk down the hallway, go to a meeting. We got to be in a meeting, another meeting. So synchronous communication is prioritized. When a remote first organization, asynchronous communication is usually the first rules of communication, because You do not know when someone is going to respond. It's not going to be immediate. So that's the difference there. Also, all the in a remote friendly company, all the processes and the tools are built around the office, right? Like they're built around the idea of going somewhere to get this thing. Where, again, in a remote first company, processes and the tools are designed to really include remote employees equally. So I talked about an intranet. If you have, a handbook that's a book, right, and it doesn't get updated except for in HQ, and then you got to resend it out, like what good is that? So having an intranet in the cloud where everyone can get the resources, everyone can get the tools at the same time, that's having a remote first mentality. The other thing is in remote friendly, you have meetings. So the meetings are scheduled at a convenient time for the people in the office, right? Whereas meetings in remote first, number one, meetings are minimized because you're not having a meeting over every single thing, but they're scheduled at a time that's convenient as best as possible for all time zones. So, prime example, you're a San Francisco company or you're an East Coast company, headquarters is on the East Coast, and you have an 8 o'clock meeting. That is not thinking remote first, because you have some people on the West Coast where it's 5 in the morning, so maybe you share some of, or maybe you have some people, in Australia, so you're actually like, 18 hours separated or something like that. So you just have to, pick times and share the kind of burden. And then I think the biggest thing, if you kind of want to look at the difference between the two, is that key decisions in a remote friendly context, key decisions are made in the office, right? So how we're going to do this policy, it's made in the office. In a remote first situation, the key decisions are discussed online openly, and everyone has an opportunity to provide input. So that's the big difference. And then, the last one is, in a remote friendly environment, like people are biased, like there's proximity bias happening in promotions, right? Like, you're working hard. I see you working hard. You come into the office all the time. In a remote first kind of environment, like those promotions and opportunities for advancement are built around KPIs and measurable objectives, measurable achievements. So that's when you're kind of talking about the difference between remote friendly versus remote first, that those are kind of the difference. And shout out to again to Doers for kind of laying that out so clearly.
Yeah, for me, I think that's why that stood out, even though I didn't remember the exact terminology, because I feel like that is the difference between the companies who are doing remote well and those who are struggling, right? Those who are
Yes.
saying, okay, it's okay. We're fine with this remote thing. We know that there's changing needs for parents and et cetera, so we'll accommodate versus we are all in. In
Right.
I feel like that's the big difference between success.
Yeah, and to me, it's almost like what Best Buy did years and years and years ago with Row. Was that it? I'm pretty sure it was Best Buy. Results only work environment. Um, like if you have tasks and they're measurable, then does it matter when I actually do them as long as I hit the deadline? And I think that's the challenge that leadership's having right now. We've gone for 2 years and people have hit their goals. People have exceeded their goals. So like they're trying, like I'm curious as to why bring people back to the office when people are performing. If you're telling people you're not performing, your numbers are lower, and I have that statistic, you need to come into the office because you are not performing as well. That is a different story. But the issue is a majority of people are performing better than they were before because what? You have more time in the day. People are actually working more hours than they were before.
You
So
don't have to travel to and from the office.
right. And just working late, answering emails more conveniently on the weekend. Now, should you do that? That's a different debate. But
Okay.
like, yeah, like it's the challenge for the return to office is the why. because people are like, well, look at my sales numbers. That's a measurable thing. That's a remote first mentality. Look at my sales numbers. Look at the number of tickets that I've completed for customer service. So yeah, that's
Well, and again, going back even to this, the companies that weren't doing well in person were missing systems, processes, structure that was necessary that this may be uncovered, like goals and tracking mechanisms, right? They were doing the tap your hand, tap the shoulder measure of performance. So it really has probably uncovered some of those things. If you have those going well, then a performance issue is a performance issue, whether you're in the office or you're at home. And I think people don't necessarily see that or realize that because they don't have the right systems to actually address performance, or they don't have the right training to address performance.
Yeah. And development. Yeah, they don't have the training to develop their employees, right?
Right.
So yeah, absolutely. I mean, I used to watch March Madness. Sorry, just not to call you. I used to say in the office, everyone's like, "Oh, come to the office, get it done." Come on, during March Madness, I'm watching the NCAA tournament on my computer at work. A majority of the people are, because there's office pools. So it's like, well, are they working like just because they came into the office? Not necessarily, or when the Masters are on for golf. Back in the day when Tiger was on, everyone's huddled around people's computers watching Tiger. So I just feel like this whole idea of if butts are in seats, you're getting the job done is such a false false thought, false statement.
I'm curious, what haven't I asked you that you wish I would have?
We've been talking about a lot of stuff. We talked about connections. We talked about onboarding. We talked about how do you. So I guess I would want to talk about the remote employee experience briefly. So that's what we consult in Blend. Like that's our focus is the remote employee experience, and the reason why is because if you focus on that experience, if you're a hybrid remote company. I know. I'm sorry. This is it. The three definitions. That one's a good one.
Both. We've got time.
Okay. Cool.
Hold on to that one. Tell us more about the remote employee experience.
Okay. The remote employee experience. Okay, good. So, and remind me, it's about the different types of remote work because that's a big thing right now. Everyone has their own definition. So, so the remote employee experience, how we look at it as, it's that complete employee life cycle, and there's a good amount of things that are in that experience. Now, Gallup, they design a great definition on what the employee experience is. So we were looking around like, well, what's different? Like what's different between, the employee experience in person versus the remote employee experience? And honestly, not too much. I mean, that's just the truth. You got to have a great way to attract people. You have to have a hiring process that eliminates unconscious bias. You have to be able to onboard people. You have to be able to set up performance evaluations. Then you have to engage them. Then you have to develop them. And then you have to offboard them. So that's just the employee life cycle. That's the definition that they have for the employee life cycle from beginning until the end. But what we realized when we were looking at this, and we were like, geez, what's the huge difference? Well, we came up with the first thing was trust. Trust is, and again, this could be applied to in person, but in a remote workspace, you have no choice. Trust is assumed, not trust is earned in a remote workspace, right? And it works both ways. The employer has to trust that the employee is going to get the job done because we just hired you. So we have to have some trust that you're at home and you're going to work and you're going to get it done. So we're going to assume some trust there. But then the employee has to trust the employer that they're going to follow through on everything that they said on their website, from their employee value propositions to their goals, to their mission. they have to actually follow through on what they said in the job description. So then there's trust. And again, that's for both people. Then what's next? Our responsibility. Responsibility. So now we're going to start with the employer. The employer needs to take on the responsibility of ensuring that they have all of their things, all of the resources set up for this, for their employees to get the job done. They have to ensure that their environment is psychologically safe, so that people feel like that they can come to work being themselves and asking questions. There's a lot of responsibility on the employer to get this right. And then the employee has to take on the responsibility of doing the job, of asking questions when I have a question, because no one's going to know if you're struggling. So you have to take on that personal responsibility to raise your hand, to ask questions. So that's how we came up with the acronym of TREE, which stands for the Remote Employee Experience. So we feel like that is critical, and that's where we kind of consult in those avenues right there.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Tree.
Yeah, tree.
Now, you had an aha there before about different definitions of remote, so let's not forget it.
Okay. You are not a remote company if you require your employees to come into the office 3 days a week. Like that, do not put that. And I think that's where right now applicants are having a really, really big struggle with. How we define, so we used to use the word telework, and we still do because that's the old school definition. But the idea here is that, there's 3 different types of telework / remote work. Like it's all flexible. And the first one that we use, how we define it, is fully distributed, right? Fully distributed or fully remote. And that's simple, right? Employees work from wherever they're the most comfortable. That's it. There's no centralized workplace. Now I get it. If you want to say, well, my digital centralized workplace, I get that, but I'm talking about like a physical workplace, okay? So don't crush me on, well, workplace can be digital. Okay, Neil? Okay, Neil from the digital workspace. So there's no centralized workplace. You work from wherever you are. That's fully distributed.
Okay.
Hybrid remote, and the reason why we use hybrid remote and not just the word hybrid is because there's an emphasis on remote there, right? So we use hybrid remote. We define hybrid remote as a majority of your work week is done remotely, while some people work on site while other people's work remotely. Now, within that definition, there's a whole bunch of variations. So you could have a bunch of people that are required to go into the office Monday through Friday, 5 days a week, and then another set of people that are fully remote. You could have people come into the office 2 times a week, or maybe 1 time a week. To us, that is a hybrid remote company. The last one we use is telecommute, because yes, telecommute has existed for a long time. But the difference is, how we define it, is that telecommute, you're required to work in the office a majority of the work week. So if you're required to work in the office 3 days a week and your work week is 5 days, you're a telecommuter. You're not a hybrid remote worker, because all the policies and procedures are still based around you have to go into the office. You're just allowed to work from your home maybe once a week, maybe twice a week, but a majority of your work week, you're required to be in the office. So to me, if you're an employer, do not post a job that says hybrid remote and you're required to go into the office 4 times a week, because that's not hybrid. The root of hybrid and the root of remote work, it's about choice, it's about flexibility. That is not being flexible. So I think right now what's happening is a lot of people are applying to jobs that say remote, and they have in there, well, it's remote, 2 days a week. So that to me is just not being honest about the situation. And then even hybrid. Oh, we're a hybrid company. You got to come into the office 4 days a week. That's not hybrid. You're just giving me a telecommute day.
So being very intentional when posting about jobs, especially in this market, about who you are and what you really are doing.
Right. Explain exactly your expectations on that piece, right? I do feel like that there's a lot of ingenuine job posting because they realize if you look on LinkedIn right now, and everybody should give it a try, type in customer service, right? And then filter based on remote only and look how many people applied. Then look at a customer service job where it's on-site only and look at how many people applied. You're going to be very shocked at those numbers.
Somehow I don't think I will be, but I can imagine why people would be.
I think I looked at one job. It was like 400 applicants compared to 18 or something like that.
Yeah, it's very different. The more requirements you're putting on people these days, the less applicants you are finding. That is for sure, especially in this environment. Well, Kaleem, this has been wonderful. I am going to ask you kind of a non-remote question for a minute that I ask all of my guests.
Yes.
You said I ask hard questions, so we'll see how you do on this one. I want to ask you, what is something that you would like to try in business or in life that is outside of your comfort zone that you haven't yet?
Beyond the comfort zone. I love it. I love it. Okay. I'm not necessarily afraid of heights, but I want to try bungee jumping. There's something about like jumping out of the plane. I don't know. I don't know why. I just feel like there's a cord attached. I'm a little bit more safe. But I would like to try bungee jumping. I think that would be really, really, really crazy and fun. So yeah, I think it's bungee jumping. I think you're muted. You are muted. Aviva, you're muted.
I am muted.
Oh, yes.
That's probably a good thing.
We got it. I think you're muted. It's definitely the best coffee cup I've seen in the past 2 years. I think you're on mute, and you did it on your own show. That's wonderful.
That is actually a first. I don't think I have done that yet on this show. Normally, I don't bother to mute, but as you guys can tell, I am definitely not 100%. You don't need to hear my coughing today. So,
yes, it's bungee jumping.
I've been trying to spare you guys.
Something about falling down and like looking like you're gonna just end like at the bottom, and then it pulls you back up, and then the fact that it like you do it again, you're like no. I mean, I just can imagine how like intense bungee jumping is.
You're making me cough. Yeah, what I was saying is I've skydived, I've hang glide. I have never had the inclination to bungee jump, so good for you. I look forward to hearing about it when you do. I thank you so much for being on the show. It's just been an honor. Kaleem, if you can put your LinkedIn for people to reach out to you and chat, and I'm going to put mine. For some reason, I didn't copy before. So this is here for...
Feel free to connect with me.
Everybody. So if you want to connect with me, you can schedule a meeting or reach out to me on LinkedIn. Kaleem just put his contact info as well. Thank you to everyone who joined today. And until next time on Beyond the Comfort Zone, I encourage all of my viewers to try something new outside your comfort zone, be it bungee jumping or not, because that's where growth occurs and life begins. Have a great day, everyone.